and he was like, I want to do it. I'm like, ha ha ha, I'm the one doing it.
Okay, and we are going live. Okay, and we are live with Lisa from NYU. Lisa, thank you so much for being a guinea pig on our first Facebook Live. And hopefully we're going to get some people logging in today and asking us a few questions, and we should be able to cover everything that we could possibly want to cover when we talk about NYU and US admissions and that sort of thing. But we're not going to make it too serious, because none of us like being too serious, do we?
I think that's true, and thank you so much for having me. It's my first Facebook Live as well, so I'm kind of excited.
Mine too. We'll see if it all works. Certainly I've got a notification saying that we are live, so I presume that people can see us, and hopefully we'll see some comments coming in. So Lisa, do you want to maybe start just by introducing yourself and talking a bit about who you are and where you come from and what you do at NYU?
Sure. So my name is Lisa Mortini. I'm French originally, but I've been in London for 18 years now, so British as well, legally. I've always worked in education as a teacher before. I've worked for a business school for more than 10 years, and I've now been at NYU since 2018. And I work in the global admissions team. So really looking after applications that come from candidates from outside the US, as well as on the NYU Abu Dhabi team. So I have like a bit of a double hat, which is kind of interesting, being based in London, working for a team in New York and a team in Abu Dhabi. So I'm somewhere, there's always a meeting at a strange hour of the day, but it's always very exciting. And so a lot of my recruitment work covers certain parts of Europe, as well as certain territories in the US. For all of our 3 campuses in New York, Shanghai, and Abu Dhabi, but also in the US for Abu Dhabi specifically. And my reviewing, so my admissions part is really for NYU Abu Dhabi. So keeps me on my toes. It's really fun, just amazing team to work with. And I'm really enjoying, connecting with prospective students and getting them through the journey of becoming an NYU student.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for being here, Lisa. I have had notifications from the UES team that we are live and that people can see our videos, so that's good. No direct questions as yet, but I thought I'd try and preempt some of the questions that might come through. There's always a few, and I think you know what they are as well. But I think maybe the first one we can talk about is NYU has several campuses around the world, and I think one of the maybe one of the confusing things about students when they think about NYU is that they always think, first of all, oh, it's that university in New York, but that's not really how you describe yourselves, is it?
I would say it's a bit of a yes and no. Originally, we were in and out of the city of New York. Like, this is really why the institution was created, was to help New Yorkers have access to education. And it is our largest campus, for sure. It's our core identity. This is where we have 10 undergraduate schools. This is where you will find the College of Arts and Science. This is where you will find Stern School of Business or Tisch School of Arts. But we go beyond that. And I think we are now really a university of the world. And for that, we have done something that not a lot of unis actually have done, which is to have proper, fully degree granting campuses outside of our home country. So we have one in Shanghai and one in Abu Dhabi. And on top of that, we also have 12 study away centers. So the study away centers are a little bit different. This is where students who are from either Shanghai, Abu Dhabi, or New York can go for, say, a term. And they will have an experience in a different country, maybe studying in a different language, maybe focusing on a minor or a major by taking specific electives that they couldn't take in their home campus. But it's more of a shorter term experience. So if you're a Shanghai student, you'll start in Shanghai, you'll finish in Shanghai, but maybe in the middle, usually in your second or third year, you will go and experience one of our other campuses around the world. And what's also kind of unique and different is that these are not exchanges, these are not partners, they are NYU sites. So if I, for instance, and I've actually done that, if you go to the Prague site, for instance, I can use my NYU card and I can print stuff. Like it works. Like if you're in Buenos Aires and you want to order a book from the New York Library, you can do that. So you are very much an NYU student wherever you go. There's quite an advantage of still being a part of the network and getting the same kind of support that you would get as an NYU student. And yeah, it's an amazing experience for our students. Obviously, right now, as we stand, there's a lot of discussion about will students be able to make good use of that. We're hoping that they will, but of course, it is something that will still need to be addressed in the near future. What I can say is that I've visited quite a few of our sites already. So I've been obviously to Abu Dhabi many times, to Shanghai. I work in the London site. I've been to the Prague sites, and they're just very unique in their own right. Very different. The feel is different. The community is different, but incredibly active sites. And I think as a student, yes, you can learn from a book. Yes, you can learn from a video, but being there on the site and experiencing it with other people is so different, and I think it's fantastic.
And we've got a few questions coming in, some of them predictably about SAT and ACT scores, which we'll come on to. But there's one related to what you were just talking about, which is, given that you've got different campuses around the world, how would a student who might be considering going to NYU decide which campus they should go to?
Yes, that's a really good question. First off, I think a lot of it will come down to a few factors. One will be, where do you want to study? And it's as simple as that, because the experience on a much smaller community-focused campus in Abu Dhabi and a much larger, very urban campus in New York will be very different for your 4 years, that's for sure. But it's also about what you want to study. So across all of our campuses, we have about 240 areas of studies. That's a lot. We don't teach everything, but we teach a lot. Not everything is available everywhere. So for instance, if you are looking to study very specific topics, they might just be offered in Shanghai, or they might just be offered in New York. And so you also may have to make those choices for yourself. For instance, in Abu Dhabi, we don't teach business. We have amazing science labs. So if you're interested in business, you might want to go to Shanghai or New York. If you're interested in sciences, you can go across all of our 3 campuses. So I think when you start making those choices, you need to think about where you want to be. And it's as simple as this: what location do I think I will be comfortable in? What do I want to study? And then start going a bit deeper into the data that you can find in your research. And that would be, who am I going to study with? So what is the makeup of the class in terms of the type of students that you get, the nationalities, who am I going to learn from? And I would say also, this is very pragmatic. How am I going to pay for my education? And the financial aid situation is different in Shanghai, in Abu Dhabi, and in New York, and that might also be a decisive factor. So even though our campuses have a lot in common, they are also slightly unique and slightly different while being part of the NYU umbrella. So I would say, when you're trying to figure out how you're going to choose, really look at those factors that we mentioned. Do a lot of research. Talk to people. Talk to people like me at Admissions. Talk to people from those campuses. Talk to student ambassadors. Talk to alumni, if you know some from your high school. I think it's super helpful to have those conversations, because those experiences will be very different. I would say also that we have specific programs called the Liberal Studies and Global Liberal Studies, where our students are able to start their program in other campuses. This is very specific, so I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail, but they could start in Madrid, they could start in London, they could start in Paris, and for a year, and their first experience of NYU will be at one of those sites. And then either they do their full degree under the Global Liberal Studies, or they move on to the New York campus. So it's really interesting to see that there is so much you can do as you start your journey. Although, to be fair, most students will choose to go to New York, Shanghai, and Abu Dhabi, and will start and finish their studies on the same campus.
Okay. And a related question to that, really good question, is there any difference between the sort of financial aid that you get at different campuses, and how does that work?
Yes, there is, and especially if you're what we call a non-domestic student. So if you are an international student and you're applying to NYU, I think depending on where you apply, the situation might be quite different. So as things may change from year to year, I'll always advise you to go to our website first and look into the financial aid pages into a high amount of detail. It's complicated. There's an enormous amount of information, but there's a lot of breakdown. There's really good videos that explain to you how the system works. But in a nutshell, especially if you're applying to the New York campus, we are looking at a type of financial aid that is threefold. You will have what we call scholarships. So that would be money that will be given to you based on needs or merits, and that will be essentially free money. There will be also loan opportunities, so especially for domestic students, but potentially we can advise on loans for students from international countries. And then there's also work-study opportunities. So if you are not an American citizen, you will be able to work on campus for if I'm not mistaken, on the visa law for up to 20 hours per week. But there are some students that are able to work in the dorms, in the library, do some odd jobs around campus to help offset with their tuition. So what happens is that when we read an application, we make a decision, do we want to admit this student? And then the financial aid office, which is located in New York for all of our free campuses, looks into this, looks into your financial situation. So you will fill forms. One is called FAFSA, and that's if you're an American citizen. If you're not, most of our international students will fill something called a CSS profile. And that gives a lot of information to our team about your financial situation. And based on this, we will make recommendation for your financial aid package, which will include those three elements that I spoke about before: scholarship, loans, as well as work study. Now, as an international student, you need to bear in mind that financial aid, especially for the New York campus, might not be as strong as if you were a domestic student. So our students may get a form of support, but it won't be full tuition. Is really something that's very important, and that really happens a lot for American universities. It's an expensive endeavor, and if you are looking to study at an American university, you should really start thinking about how you're planning to finance this. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the return on investment is fantastic, but it is an investment to start with. On our Shanghai campus, this is a similar situation. Slightly different figures, but a similar situation. Our Abu Dhabi campus is a little bit unique and a little bit different. So this is a very competitive campus to get in. It's a much smaller campus, but it is a campus located in a part of the world where the local government, so the Abu Dhabi government, was very keen to develop a sort of center of international education and cooperation. To do this, they've been supporting the NYU Abu Dhabi endeavor since it started, really. And for that, they also support us financially, which means that we're in a position to have financial aid packages that are much more generous. So the way I explain it in a nutshell is that if you apply to Abu Dhabi, let's imagine that the program costs 100, and the financial aid team decides that you can afford 80 out of that 100. Great. What happens is that we'll give you 20, and you'll be able to do your studies. Awesome, that's great. Scholarship money, fantastic. But if we assess your situation and we realize that you can only afford 15% of the program, the rest will be covered. So it's not like everybody can go to NYU Abu Dhabi for free, don't get me wrong, but a lot of our students who maybe are incredibly bright and have done incredibly well and are selected to go into this unique competitive campus, but cannot afford the studies, will receive a form of support that will allow them to do that. And so that is quite different from the other campuses.
Okay, great. So would you say that if someone needed financial aid, they should really keep their options open with regards to which campus they should apply to?
I think they should, and I think they should also be inventive. Like I've seen kids apply to NYU Shanghai and crowdsource their funding. Like I've seen kids put videos online and actually get financial support from strangers around the world to be able to pay for their studies. There are also scholarship money that goes around different countries, different governments. There are some testing agencies, English language testing agencies that have scholarship funds as well. So keep your options open. Do a lot of research. Apply to as many scholarships as you can. Don't think that you have to stay focused on a specific campus just for that, because things do change and do happen. However, if you are already excited by the idea of going to NYU Abu Dhabi and you think you might need financial aid, then that could really be a good option.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, we've got a couple of questions here about tests, so we might as well get those out the way because it's always going to come up.
Let's do that.
I know, Lisa, that you're very fond of interrupting me whenever I say that NYU is test optional, because it's not test optional, is it? How do you describe it?
Yes, that is true. And I apologize to all of our international candidates because the jargon is so complicated and it's so hard to wrap your head around. And there's so many different things that different unis are doing. And also right now it's changing a lot as well. So my first piece of advice is do keep track of all the schools you're interested in and really always make sure you have the most up-to-date information. So what you mean by test optional, test flexible? At NYU, we are test flexible. And the reason why we like that word is because it means that we do require a form of testing. So what is testing? Testing is usually the SAT or the ACT. And these are tests that people around the world can take to prove that they have the right, I want to say, academic and intellectual foundations to be able to go to an American university. And this is a test that students in the US, high school students in the US will take to go into American schools. Now, because we are test flexible, what that means is that we require a form of testing, but not necessarily the SAT or the ACT. We are a very global university. We're also very internationally minded. And so we are the school in the US that receives the most applications from around the world. And we also are the school that enrolls the most international students. To be able to do that, we have to be flexible. We completely understand that if you haven't started prepping for the ACT since you were 15, chances are you're going to prep for 2 weeks and face a test that means very little in terms of your academic performance. So what we will want to see is evidence that is just as good as those tests that we can accept as an alternate form of testing. For instance, if we have people in our audience right now that are from the UK, if you're doing the A-levels, good news, you don't have to do the SAT or the ACT, which is great. If you're doing the Irish Living Certification or the IB or the French BAC or the IB2 or many other international, or as you would call them back home, national qualifications, you will be able to apply to NYU without having to take the SAT or the SAT. Now, not all universities in the US operate that way. So again, be very careful when doing your research. If you're applying to several schools, which probably you will, not all of them will operate the same way. So you want to make sure that if you have to take the test, you don't miss out. You are able to take it if you need it for another application. I'm going to preempt another question quickly because I get that one a lot. It's like, well, I'm applying to another school and they require the SAT, and so I've taken it, so should I tell you? Well, it depends. And I would say probably, unless it's an amazing score, probably not. Because what we'll want to see is the most accurate evidence of your academic ability. And let's imagine you're taking the A-levels or the IB. That's usually your transcript so far, maybe your GCSEs or AS if you've done them. For your IB, it will be what you did before, and then your first year of IB, and then your predictions. And this is what we're going to base our decision on, your A-level predictions or your IB predictions. And an average, mediocre, slightly low SAT is not going to impress a school that's competitive. So I would say if you need to, you can, but my advice would be to go against that. If it's not required and if it's extra information that may not help you, we don't need to know.
Okay, I think that's a really important point to try and get clear for people, I think, because this is similar at lots of test optional colleges, is that people always think, well, I might as well submit my score because it's going to show that I've done something extra. But what you're actually saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that submitting a score that isn't in keeping with the rest of your application, i.e. it's lower than the rest of the other things that show off how academic you are, that could actually be detrimental to your application.
I think it could be, and I think it's one of those situations where once I've seen it, I cannot unsee it. So let's imagine that your predictions for the A-levels are A, and A star. That's fantastic. And suddenly you have 1080 is your SAT. It's not that competitive. And once I know this, I cannot unsee that information. So I'd rather not know. really do your research, be very, very careful as to what universities are requiring from you. And especially if some of you are new to the process, it's so different from UCAS. Like, you know, people like Jason at UAS, that they know how it works and know how complicated it is. They can guide you, but it's not easy. So be very careful, and be careful to give the information that is required of you. Do not go overboard. It's not a question of cramming as much as you can. If we don't need it, we don't need it. That is okay. If we were to need it, we would ask you for it.
Okay. But if you did get, let's say, a 1550 on your SAT, it's probably handy to submit.
All right, fine. If you really, really ace the test and you're like, this is the best score I've ever seen, and let's say you have the best test score in your country, sure, share it, obviously. I mean, we're not crazy, you know, if you have an almost near perfect score, we're like, okay, that's pretty good. I think it's more if you're on the average side of those scoring, which in fairness is fine, because, you know, schools are really, they want high testing. Don't think anything bad about yourself if you get a slightly low SAT. It's just a test. We are looking at everything else in your application, and that's really important to remember.
Yeah. I think it's sometimes difficult for students and families to understand just how many things American colleges in particular actually look at in an application. And I think because test scores and school grades are the things that are most within the student's control, they think that, well, maybe if I just put more effort into those and ace those, that's going to get me in. But presumably there are lots of other things that you actually care about as much, if not more.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it all comes down to one word, and we've had these conversations before, it's fit. And you're going to say, okay, well, that means nothing. I'm like, well, it actually means a lot. And it means a lot to US colleges, because someone who's applying to a small school in the Midwest that has a very specific program that they're excited about in a very small campus, and it's maybe one of those, you know, idyllic campuses that you see on TV where the whole town revolves around the campus, and they're going to be like the best at what they do in that small campus. And someone who's applying to be in the heart of New York when there's going to be about 26,000 undergraduates on one campus, you know, it's a very different experience. And even though those two schools might be just as good as each other, very high in the, you know, ranking tables and so on, it's a very different experience. And you as a unique individual, you won't be the right fit for one of those because they're very different. So when you're doing your research and when you're identifying the schools that you're interested in, go beyond the rankings. Also remember that there's thousands of schools in the US. So really, really, you can look at a large amount of schools in the rankings, but go beyond that. Really identify what are the elements that matter to you, because it'll show in your application. When we read an application of someone who really know what they're getting into, we can tell they've done their research. We can tell they're applying for reasons that are unique and specific to them. We're like, okay, this person will be a good fit for our community. And it doesn't mean they have to be the same as each other. We're not looking for carbon copies of people, but we are looking for people who share, I guess, our vision, who share a certain sense of who they could be within our community. And if you can tell us that in the application, it makes a huge difference. And again, that is very different from applying to a school in the UK or in continental Europe for that matter.
Okay, that's really useful. Just to pull it back slightly back to test scores again, because there is obviously a bit of change at the moment. We've had a question here saying, are there any plans for NYU to go test blind in the future?
Not for now, mostly because we have so many other options. So the fact that we are already test flexible at the moment means that the vast majority of our students, if they're doing APs, if they're doing IB, if they're doing A-levels, all sorts of curriculums are already able to apply without taking the test. So at the moment, we're not planning on this. But in this, situation, you never know. Obviously, I never say never, I guess. But at the moment, as far as I know, we're not planning on going test optional fully. Okay.
I guess a related question is about the subject test, because being test flexible, your policy normally is that you would accept the subject test in lieu of other tests. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
So given
there are specific things that we're looking for in the subject test, and you can find that on our website. But yes, we would accept them as opposed to sort of the full SAT. Yeah.
I guess what I was wondering was that because many colleges are going test blind for subject tests now, would that change your policy at all about subject tests, or are you still just keeping it as open as possible for students?
It's as open as possible. And I think because they're just one other form of testing, it's on par with everything else. So at the moment, no, nothing's changing on that,
okay.
that front.
That's good to hear. Okay, so you were talking about fit just now.
Yes.
And one person has asked, what is your favorite thing about NYU? So this is really coming down to what your fit is. I mean, did you go to NYU for undergraduate, Lisa?
I did not. I wish I had. I did not have this opportunity, actually. So just a quick one. I actually went to school in France. I did 2 master's degree and also a diploma in communication. This is all very complicated. But part of my master's degree, actually, I was working in teaching at a college in New York, and we were bought by Fordham. So I was actually, you know, part of it, another university that's in New York on the other side of the river. But I didn't have this opportunity to be at NYU. In my previous role, what was interesting is that I was recruiting for master's programs, and I actually spent a lot of time at NYU recruiting NYU students to come and study business in the UK. So I had the flip side of things. So I could see the quality of the NYU students, and I had a relationship with the school already, and they were the schools that sent us the most candidates. So that was very exciting. I would say the original question, was it my favorite thing about NYU?
Yeah, what's your favorite thing about NYU?
How many hours do we have, Jason?
You're only allowed to choose one favorite thing.
Okay, so I would say, and this is going to be a bit out there, and this is really linked to something that is close to my heart. I would say what it's given me is the opportunity to challenge preconceptions. So when I studied at NYU, I studied on a Friday. On a Sunday, I was on a plane to spend 3 weeks in Abu Dhabi with my new team. And I've been to Abu Dhabi one day before in my entire life. So this was quite the experience, and I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I was onboarded by an amazing team of people that really care for what they do, that really are excited to be in such an organization where we really look beyond our own navel, and we really are trying to connect the rest of the world together. And for me to think, okay, I don't know what it's going to be working remotely and also on site with the team in the Middle East. I didn't have that experience, and it was an amazing, life-changing experience. And so now being part of this network, I have to say, has changed my life in so many ways. So for me, what I really like about NYU is that it gave me this opportunity to think outside the box, to challenge myself and to do things that are different. And I think that happens to a lot of our colleagues, and happens to our students, and even our faculty members. Like so many faculty members I talked to when I was in Abu Dhabi said, hey, I taught in New York for 10 years, and they say, oh, do you want to go for 6 months in Abu Dhabi? That was 5 years ago, and they're still there. And so it changed their lives, and their research life, and their family life, and their personal life as well. And so for me, that's been an amazing experience.
That's great. One question we've got coming in here is about, I guess this is leading on to the obvious conversation about what's going to happen this September. But one person has asked what virtual resources there are for NYU applicants at the moment, or potential applicants. So let's say someone was thinking about applying to NYU. What could they do to learn more about NYU and the different campuses without actually being able to visit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you actually just Google NYU visit, it takes you to a page that has a whole lot of information. And especially we have a virtual tour page. So there's 2 things on that page: virtual information session and a virtual tour of campus. So you can absolutely go on this and play this for yourself and get a sense of that experience. It's not the same as being there, but for obvious reason, it's the best we can do at this point. So we're also running a series of live info sessions that are happening 3 times a week at different times of the day to accommodate our international population.
Okay.
I don't know that you can subscribe to them right now. It's going to our inquiry pool first because we have a lot of people who are signed up to visit the campus. I haven't been able to do this, but very, very soon you'll be able to also register for these. So keep an eye on our website because those live info sessions will be an excellent way to learn more about the school. At the moment, this is being held in New York by the New York team, but that will be rolled out also for Abu Dhabi and Shanghai very soon. And it's going to sound really simple. Talk to us. Like, if you're not sure, like we have an admissions inbox for New York that's simply called admissions@nyu.edu. And all of us look into this inbox every day. So I answer emails from that inbox every day. And we literally have people asking everything and anything. And we'll answer you, we'll direct you to the right links, we'll direct you to the right people. There's also the same thing for Abu Dhabi, the same thing for Shanghai. Just go on the website, find that email, just send us a message. We are real people. You won't get a message back from a robot. Real people would actually, address your queries. And you may also have a regional person. So for instance, I'm the rep for the UK, for Ireland, for France, for Monaco, and for Switzerland. If you have any questions, please contact me. We're quite happy to help you. It's in our interest to help you identify if you're the right fit for NYU and to guide you through your application because we want to see good applications. So really, I know it sounds like, oh, I can't go and visit, but you can still connect with us in many ways.
That's great. I'm amazed that you've got one inbox that you encourage everyone to email. How many emails do you get a day?
Sometimes it's, we'll have like 50 per page. Sometimes it's 2-3 pages. One time it was 12 pages. So I have a lot of fun sometimes because I wake up earlier because my colleagues in New York are still asleep. I go and I sort of like clean it up a bit and I see what's going on. I see what the trends are. It's always fun when we send an email and then you get all the bounce backs. It's super exciting. But it is crazy, but there's a big team. There's a big team of admissions counselors that are there to do this. And we man the phones as well. We have phone numbers that through a system that we're using right now that I won't name, but it's a big system. Our colleagues in New York pick up the phone if you answer from home. So, we are there to answer any of your questions. If you're a prospective student, an admitted student, a transfer student, a waitlist student, students who are applying for summer school, and there's a lot going on. We try to support you the best we can.
Wow. That sounds difficult to manage. If you've got 600 emails a day.
We have shifts.
Yeah. Okay, great. There's a person here who's asked, well, I guess this comes down to fit again, and maybe we should talk a little bit more about that before we start going on to the future. But what would you say differentiates NYU from the other New York City universities? And you mentioned Fordham already. So what's the difference between NYU and those other places? So
it's a difficult question to answer in the sense that I'm not familiar with every element of all the other New York schools, and there's quite a few. Most people will think of the big three, so they'll think of NYU, Columbia, and Fordham, but there's so many other colleges in New York. There's also the universities of New York State, so there's a lot going on there that you can find. I think it's a really interesting question. It's a bit different. So I would say the first bit to me that comes across as different, that's the most obvious, is the location and what we do with it. So we have a sort of slogan around the team that we actually have printed on jackets, I kid you not, and it says a campus without walls. If you go to other campuses in New York, you may have actual gates. I've been to Fordham several times. Beautiful. It's in the Bronx. Rose Hill campus is stunning. It's an actual, as you can imagine it, American campus with a gate that you have to pass through, and then you're inside your own bubble. Columbia is kind of a little bit like that as well to a certain extent. And NYU is very different. Like if you've visited New York as a tourist and you've been to Washington Square Park, it's at the bottom of Fifth Avenue and you've got this little arch at the bottom.
Yeah.
You've been to NYU essentially. So within 13 blocks of this park, this is where most of our activity is. We also have a campus in Brooklyn for our School of Engineering, as well as our medical schools across the city. But this is where most of the activity is happening. And so you, as a student of NYU, need to realize that you will be a part of the city, and that is quite different. It's different because if you step out to get lunch, there'll be someone walking their dogs and there'll be a tourist taking photos. And this is a slightly different experience, but it also means that you're integrated in the activity and the life of the city. And we do a lot, especially in terms of culture and the arts, to make sure that you have access to a lot of what's going on around this area. I would say also it's a slightly, it's a big community in volume, in terms of numbers, in terms of people, but it's a small community in terms of the location and the size. A lot of our faculty members live around the square, so you'll bump into people that you know all the time. And those kind of conversations, which I've seen happen in real life, are quite amazing. And that is something that you won't find on a campus that's a bit more sort of isolated. I would say also that every university, New York or not New York, they have things that they do really well. And then they have things that they really want to focus on. And there are things that they're known for. So when you're doing your research, identify not only a school that excites you, especially if they're in the same location, but look at the programs that you want to apply to. You know, if you want to, say, do a film and TV program, why not do it at Tisch, which is, you know, one of the best art schools in the country. But if you want to do another program that maybe another school does better, that's fine. That's perfectly okay. You need to make sure that you are looking, you're finding in your research, identifying the potential majors that you're interested in or the potential programs that you want to apply to, and then make those decisions. And I know it's tough because my first thing would have been to you, hey, go there and experience those campuses to see what the differences are, but it's difficult to do at the moment. I would go back though to talk to people. People who go to other schools, people who go to NYU might be slightly different from each other, might have a slightly different view of the world, might want to challenge each other in different ways. Have those conversations with actual people to identify what are those differences for yourself. And then there are things that are the same. It's true. Big universities, successful universities, great professors, you know, more or less a similar location. This is why it's complicated for you sometimes to make those choices and to decide where it is that you want to study. So I'm a big fan of Excel spreadsheets, I'm going to say, or Google Sheet. You know, just write it down. Write down all the things that matter to you and then have different columns for different universities. And this is how you assess what works and what doesn't work. It sounds very kind of boring, but, you know, you can make it colorful. You can put links and, you know, and make it in a way that, you know, it doesn't have to be just a pro and con list. It doesn't have to be, well, if this university doesn't have 5 things, they're out of the running. It also depends on how much these things matter to you. But it will help you get a clearer picture of the type of university you want to get into, because the feel for that university can be different. So I'm going to do a plug. I'm going to say, go on our website and Google Meet NYU. Meet NYU is our blog page. And this is where people like me, so I write for Meet NYU, we write a lot of articles that give you a sense as to who our professors are, who our students are, what our campus is like, but we also give a lot of advice about applying. So I'm working on a piece right now that's going to give advice as to how you choose your essays. We're going to do a piece about counselors. We have a lot of information that helps you get a feel for a community, for a university, and I think that's super useful.
Great, that's a good tip. The spreadsheet tip is a really good one. And there are some good resources out there that people have already compiled, actually, with exactly what you said, columns listing all the things that are important to you, but also weighting them by how important they are to you. And then surprising things can happen. I always say this to students, that the things that are important to you might make certain universities pop up to the top of your list that you didn't expect. Because I think the problem with rankings, even though NYU is, of course, very well ranked, is that sometimes they're ranking things that you just don't care about. So it's always important to go and work out what's important for you.
And I think for the rankings in the US, you also really should think about the volume. So any school that's ranked in like top 150 is really solid. I mean, we're looking at thousands of schools in the US. It's a very different picture from, say, the UK, where you have a very limited amount of schools. And therefore, if a school is not maybe in the top 15, you might be more reluctant if you're very competitive minded. But in the US, it's very different. And you could have a school that's maybe in the mid 50s, but maybe their, I don't know, marine biology program is amazing and it's ranked number 2. That might be a school for you. And that's something to really think about.
Mm, great. So let's move on to the future. And I know that you pre-warned me before we went live, that you didn't have all the answers. You're not some kind of clairvoyant guru, unfortunately. But what do you think are the things that we know are going to be different about university when students come back in September?
Well, I don't know, and I think none of us know, and that's what's so difficult at the moment, because the situation is really, really volatile and it's changing every day. And so I think something to think about for us as well is that we're not just in one location. We have all of our other campuses in all of our other countries to look into. So at the moment, we're hoping and planning for students to be on our campuses physically and for the term to start on time for the moment. Okay. Now, that being said, we're monitoring the situation like every other business, like every other school, like every other organization out there, to see what will be the rules, not only from governments, but also from the state. So for instance, in the US, it's what the federal government says, but it's also what the New York state is going to say can happen. And based on that, then we'll be able to make decisions as we get closer to the start date. Of course, situations can be different in Abu Dhabi, in Shanghai. There might be some ability and some flexibility between those locations. We don't want students to, fall behind or to not be able to start. There are things that might be out of our control. Governments may or may not issue visas for international students, for instance. So what do? Are planes flying? Are you literally physically able to go to school? All of these things will come into play, and many, many, many more factors that are difficult for us to assess right now. So we will keep our admitted student pool obviously informed as soon as we have a bit more clarity. At the moment, again, we're hoping that things will be business as usual. But the fact is that because we have a campus in Shanghai and they had to go virtual incredibly early, way earlier than all the other campuses in the US, we're very well versed into how to react quickly to changes in situations. We were able to adapt our learning and our teaching, experiences really early on. And so I think that's really helped the university know how to sort of react to these situations. And it's been incredibly helpful as an experience, and I think it will help once we have to make those decisions. So on campus, fully virtual or hybrid, who knows? As you say, I don't have a crystal ball. I have no idea. If I had a crystal ball, I would have won the lottery a long time ago. But we'll see. And I would say, if you are interested in us and any other school for that matter, most schools will have a COVID-19 page that addresses some of the issues with all the new developments. We for sure have a web page just dedicated to that. Keep an eye on that regularly in the next few weeks, because I would say that through the summer, as the summer is arriving, most schools will make those important decisions, and then you'll know what's going to happen in the near future. What matters to us is the safety and the health of our students, faculty members, and staff. So this will always be paramount within the parameters that we're given.
Okay. And presumably students at the moment are doing online lectures, is that right?
They are. It's really amazing. Like it's crazy. Like I've seen students do performances and plays. So our theater students were doing plays on Zoom, which is crazy.
Wow.
We've had people, so there is one professor who does, I don't know how to explain this, but he does like models for movies, like clay models and things. And he basically put together those packs that he sent to his students so they could do it at home. There's people doing labs in their kitchen. Be careful with that. I would say be really careful with this. I'm not advocating this. But there's ways to do things even for, and it's not always 100% possible, but even for subjects that technically you think couldn't be done online, faculty members and students themselves are very crafty and very, very resourceful, and they've been able to do this. We also are going to have all of our commencement ceremonies, so that's our graduations, online. So it's a bit of a heartbreaking moment for us, but for instance, our Shanghai campus has shipped little packets full of goodies and full of things to celebrate so that people can celebrate within their own homes. So, we're trying to make things a bit more exciting. We realize that students would prefer to be together.
Have you shipped them the gowns as well, Lisa?
Do you know that? I don't know. I know they've shipped the hats, but I'm not sure about the gowns. I'm not sure. These are quite complicated because they're quite heavy and difficult to get. Usually people rent them. You don't buy them, so it could be a bit complicated. But we definitely are planning to see a lot of social media with people doing their own mini congregation.
Yeah, I imagine.
Our students have been very, I would say, very resilient, and it's not easy. There's complaints and there's difficulties and there's hurdles and there's like Zoom fatigue, and we all get it. Don't worry, it's normal. We're all human beings. But I think, you know, students have done their best and faculty have done their best, and everybody else needs to support. And it's complicated within a few weeks to completely change the curriculum from being in person to being online. But I think it's worked really the best it could have worked at that point, for sure.
Okay, so. We've got one other question that's just come in, and this takes us back a little bit to being admitted to NYU. And of course, that's the thing that most people are concerned about. Once they're in, it's all fun games, but it's getting in the heart of it. One person has asked about demonstrated interest.
Yes.
How much do you take that into account when students are applying, and what do they mean by that?
Yeah, I think what they mean by demonstrated interest is, for instance, connecting with NYU staff or students, going to events, being engaged in maybe NYU online classes or information sessions, or things that we can record in our database that show that you have had a connection with NYU. I assume that is what they mean. And so it is important, but not for the reason that you think. So it's not important because we're not necessarily going to have the manpower, considering the volume of applications that we get, to double check every application to know that you've attended an event 3 years ago. It would be great if we could, but that's not necessarily possible. However, if you do that, if you have a demonstrated interest in terms of connecting with us, in terms of doing your research in a way that is, I want to say, demonstrated for real, it will help you put in a better application. You will know a lot more about the university. You will be able to say, hey, when I was at this event, I talked to this person and they told me about that, and that excites me for these reasons. You could say, oh, I was at your online info session. They mentioned this club. I'm super excited to join it. That is why it's helpful. So it's not for us to say, oh, this person attended 20 events, they're in. That doesn't really work this way. I think it's more about you will be better researched and better prepared, and you will know more about the university, and you'll be able to put in a better application. I hope that is what you meant by demonstrated interest, Jason.
Yeah, that's right. I think sometimes students don't realize, first of all, that it's important to actually demonstrate to a university that you're interested, but also sometimes they might not realize what sort of options they've got to them about demonstrating that interest. So obviously one of them, as you said, is talking about it in your essays and things like that. But do you ever look at, I don't know, simple metrics like, do they like your Facebook page, or have they emailed you and how many times, and that sort of thing?
Oh my gosh, I wish. We have more than 85,000 applications a year just for the undergrad programs. There's zero chance that we would have the time to double check that. We do it for other reasons, just to know that the student population as a whole is engaged, what works, what doesn't work, how do we reach out to you, how do you want us to communicate with you? Of course, but on a one-by-one basis, not even close. And for that matter, don't send us links to your LinkedIn page, Facebook page, videos, YouTube page, whatever, TikTok. I do not have the physical time, as fun as that would be, to look at your videos or online CVs. And again, it would be amazing if we could, but we receive an enormous amount of application, and we do want to focus on the elements that we requested of you so that we know that we do a fair assessment across the board. And so don't go too crazy in the application. Don't send us a million links. And don't worry too much. Again, this level of research will pay off for yourself, because you'll also decide through your research if you want to apply or not. You might do research and go, you know what, this isn't for me. And that is fine. It will be helpful regardless. But don't worry too much about some of the metrics, and don't worry too much about sending us an enormous amount of external sort of links.
What if, because obviously you have a good opportunity to meet potential students at things like Fulbright College Day and stuff. how much do you remember students? So if a student comes up to you and asks you a really nice question and is very complimentary about what you're wearing or something, do you remember that? And then
you'll be very surprised.
Oh yes, that was.
So don't worry too much about what I'm wearing, because I tend to wear my NYU Abu Dhabi polo shirts, or like, I'm not today, I'm in blue, but normally I wear my proper shirts. So don't worry too much about the compliments, although it's always nice as long as it's real. But what I would say is that you'll be surprised how much you can remember people. And I think especially for me, because my markets are a bit on the smaller side. So, when I go to events in Switzerland or in France, I might meet maybe 15, 20 students at a time, maybe 30. And some people really engage with you and they have interesting questions. And you'll be very surprised how much we'll remember you. There are people that I meet in Abu Dhabi for candidate weekend, and we look at each other and we're like, oh my God, we saw each other at this event, and it's amazing that we recognize each other. So you'll be very surprised. I would say it's not about flattery. It's more about coming, especially if you're going to one of those physical events or even in webinars. It's more about coming armed with a little bit of pre-knowledge. So unless you're navigating a big college fair and you find a university that you've never heard of before, you're very curious, that is absolutely fine. But if you already know that you're interested in NYU, don't come up to us and say, hey, so how many campuses do you have? Because I want to shoot myself. Because that's basic information that you should have from the website. Yeah. Come with an interesting questions that matter to you. If you're curious about the institution, there will be something that you will want to know. And I might not have the answer because, again, big organization, complexity. Yeah. But I remember you. I might write down your question. I'll take your email. You'll take my email, and we'll engage in that conversation. And that is much more valuable than just coming with just your basics. Like, what's your minimum SAT? Or do you offer architecture? We don't. But, it's those little things that I think if you are keen on a school, you should have already researched. So if you are connecting with us, don't talk to me about what I'm wearing. I'm not going to be wearing beautiful dresses or anything, so you'll be fine. But talk to me about things that matter to you and engage me on that level. That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, that's a great tip. So always come armed with questions that you couldn't have found out just by looking on the website. Something. Okay, I've got a final question. This is from me, actually, only because I've got a student or two who is in this situation at the moment. But if someone is on the wait list at NYU, how do you decide when and if to take those students off the wait list and offer them places?
Yeah, so it's a tough one, right? Because being on the wait list is like, we love you, but there's so many of you, we cannot take all of you at once. So unfortunately, you kind of have to wait until we're able to make better decisions. And that usually comes early May, when our regular decision deadline is passed and people have to make their deposit. So they have to matriculate. They have to say, you know what, I do want to come to NYU. I'm giving you a little bit of money to tell you I am going to come in September. And they confirm their acceptance of our offer. Once this is done, we have a little bit more freedom to look at our application pool to say, okay, well, now we know who's coming. Who else can we get in? Is there any space anywhere? Some schools will be completely, jam-packed. Some programs may have more space depending on areas of interest. It's very, very, very flexible. So when we have that information, then we're able to talk to our students on the wait list. And so we have a team that reviews all of the waitlist applications. They're not ranked. So it's not like, you're going to be number 10 on the wait list, and if we choose 11 people, you're in. It really doesn't work like that. We look at all the applications at the same time. That being said, not all of our decisions will come out at the same time. So we had some waitlist decisions come out last week. We'll have some come out next week and probably over the next few weeks. For most of our campuses and most of our schools. I know that in New York, some people could stay on the wait list up till August. Like it's a little crazy. It's just because there's so much movement. And that's normal. People suddenly have to go do military service, or they break a leg, or there's something happens and they have to defer admissions. There's always movement within a class. And very difficult because we can never give you a black or white answer. It's hard for counselors, it's hard for students, it's hard for us. But I would say if you're on the wait list, don't despair. It means that we like you. It just means that technically we just didn't have space for you. Yeah. So there's students on the wait list every year could make it into the class. That being said, we would always recommend, if you have another option that you're excited by, to potentially go and accept that option, because you don't want to miss out on something that could be amazing because you're waiting on something else that may never happen.
Yeah.
If you end up having several choices, great. It can be difficult, but at least you'll have those choices. But we wouldn't want you to sort of, expect something that may or may not happen. Another bit that's a bit more technical about the waitlist and a bit more logistical is if you are on the waitlist, you have access to a specific array of information as well as forms that you can send us that update your situation. So let's say you get a new internship or you've got a new result in one of your exams or something happened and you want to tell us about it, update the form. Don't send us love letters in our inbox. We get a lot of love letters, it's lovely. But we're not necessarily going to be able to match it easily. And our reviewing team might miss the information. If you go through the form, they'll see it because it's the proper channel. So I would say don't go too crazy again about the waitlist. Don't send us a million YouTube links. Really, really focus on how you can give us the best information that's relevant for the most appropriate channels. And that'll be very helpful because at least we're sure we're not going to miss on that information.
Okay, those are fantastic tips. I've got one final question before we finish, and that is just a question about what you've been up to, Lisa, while under lockdown. How have you been keeping busy?
Oh my God! So I started work from home early March. It's pretty much business as usual. We've been so busy. But in a way, it's great because I have teams in New York and teams in Abu Dhabi, and I get to see them on Zoom almost every day, which I didn't necessarily do before. So I think it's kind of amazing that we're more connected now than we used to be. On a personal note, I've been doing an enormous amount of baking. So I've never baked a cake in my life, and now I've made bread, I've made coconut cake, lemon cake, apple cake, like you name it. So the quarantine is not helping my belly or anything like that. Like this is not like I need to do more exercise is what I'm saying. And finally, I've been doing a lot of art. So I've been like super busy creating like little pieces. There's one up here. That's my latest one. So I've been doing like little drawings of what I can see from my windows. And
well, that's beautiful.
It's fun to do things.
You're trying to pitch your art now as well, Lisa.
Sorry? You're
trying to pitch your art now as well. How much is that?
You know what? Talk to me about it afterwards. Send me a message on Facebook. I'm not selling it. But it's nice to have projects. It's nice to have drive. And I think having a project, maybe giving yourself a deadline or something, I found that quite exciting because then I know I need to motivate myself to do it. Otherwise, there's only so much Netflix you can watch.
It's true.
What have you been up to, Jason? What have you been up to? What's up?
We're not here to talk about me. I have set myself a target of learning a few new skills before the end of lockdown, and I've achieved one of them, and I've managed to bore my my colleagues with that. So I'm not going to bore everyone watching with that. I'll talk to you afterwards about it.
No worries, that sounds good.
But Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today and being our inaugural guest on our live Q&A. We've had some great comments, and people seem to have been watching from the beginning till the end, which is great. And not all of them are my family, which is great. So thank you so much. And hopefully we can have you back on here or some other sort of webinar again soon. So
of course, anytime. Thank you guys. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. I'll end the live stream now, but we'll stay online, Lisa, and we'll have a debrief and I'll show you that skill.
Bye.
Okay. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.